Now, I know I'm gonna ruffle a lot of feathers with this one, but The Last of Us is a terribly written show, and the fact that so many people are acting like it's some great cinematic experience shows just how low our standards for storytelling have fallen. The pacing is terrible, the editing sucks, 3 out of the 9 episodes are 100% filler, and another 3 are at least 50% filler. And there's barely any zombies or dangerous people in a story that's supposed to be about a post-apocalyptic world that was destroyed by zombies and dangerous people. I enjoyed it the first time I watched it, but I felt like something was off about it, and I couldn't figure out if it was supposed to be a higher budget Walking Dead or if it was supposed to be closer to The Road. Unfortunately, it was somewhere in the middle of those, and I felt like it was too afraid to lean into the hopelessness aspect of the world, and simultaneously too afraid to explore the zombies and make it more of a horror movie experience. Now, I'm not going to compare it to the games too much, but the show really borders on feeling like it was a watered down version of a better story. The game had more action, more zombies, more tension, the pacing was so much better, and the emotional parts were way better too. And even though this is one of the best video game adaptations, it still left me feeling like I could have just watched a playthrough and had a way better experience. And that made me ask the question, why is it so easy for game creators to basically make a 10 to 20 hour interactive movie, but filmmakers struggle to tell the same story with the same characters in the exact same universe? You can literally watch edits of just the cutscenes and it's better than anything coming out of Hollywood, so I don't understand why the same people who make the games can't just write the scripts. Or even better, why can't the filmmakers just copy the story and the tone from the games instead of trying to incorporate unnecessary details like putting time travel in Assassin's Creed or the subplot of Sean Bean's character looking for his wife in Silent Hill? I used to think this was the only issue with making a video game movie, but after seeing The Last of Us, I think just copying the games is the wrong approach to making an adaptation too. The structure of a video game is very different from a narrative story, and even though most games are just interactive movies, the games still follow certain story beats that a movie or a show really can't. Because games need mini-bosses and things for the player to actually do, or else you're basically just sitting there with a controller in your hand watching an animated movie. A movie or a show really can't do this the same way because there's a certain structure to how stories are told, and you can't have a new mini-boss every few episodes because it never gives the bad guy enough time to establish why we should care about them. Imagine having Stannis, Daenerys, and the White Walkers all attacking King's Landing in one season, and only giving each of them like 2 episodes of build-up before they died. That was kind of the problem with the Crab Feeder in House of the Dragon. He was set up to be the main villain at first, but he only got like 2 episodes worth of screen time before he died, and that's one of the reasons why the first season felt really strange. It had too many villains, and 10 episodes wasn't enough to give any of them enough time for development. Otto and Daemon were kind of the main bad guys at first, then it was the Crab Feeder and Corlys's brother, then it was Laris and Kristen Cole, and then it ultimately ended up being Alicent Hightower, or House Hightower, I guess. It wasn't a problem that there were so many characters, the problem was that all of them were in one place. Game of Thrones was able to have different characters dealing with different obstacles because they were all in different locations. But when everything is happening in King's Landing, you can't really have the same format, and there has to be a main antagonist arc for each season. There was way more than enough story in the first season for 2 seasons worth of show, and that's the reason why so many people felt like the story was rushed. This was one of the problems with The Last of Us too. It could have easily been 2 seasons of material, but it never gave us time to breathe and explore the world and the characters, and after episode 2, it started to feel episodic with the new villain every other week, and then when Joel ended up killing all the Fireflies in the end, it didn't feel like they were the main bad guy of the season, so the ending felt a little underwhelming and incomplete. Now I'm gonna get real deep into episode 3, but for some reason everyone absolutely fell in love with it. And even though I think everything before Frank showed up was some of the best post-apocalyptic stuff I'd ever seen, the entire episode exposed a massive flaw in the story that everyone just seemed to ignore for some reason. And even though this was the first example of it, it wouldn't be the last, because even though this is supposed to be a post-apocalyptic world that was destroyed by a zombie-like infection, the zombies or the infection never seemed to be a problem for anyone. Oh, and I'm gonna be calling them zombies most of the time, even though they might not technically be zombies, so you don't have to correct me on that, it just feels better to say zombie instead of infected. But after this intro, I really won't have to say either one because they're only in like 3 episodes, so it honestly doesn't really even matter either way. Anyway, Bill and Frank survived for almost 20 years in this perfect little town, and they never had to worry about being infected or dealing with people that were infected at all. 20 fucking years of eating strawberries and being in love, and somehow I'm supposed to give a shit about killer mushroom people after this. The end of episode 2 was the first time we really got a chance to see how dangerous it was outside of the QZ, but then the showrunners just said, "Fuck it! Let's just tell this random side story with no zombies and make the world look as safe and non-threatening as possible." We only see one goofy ass zombie come anywhere near the town, and for some reason it's a slow Romero-style walker and not a chaotic fast one like all the other ones we see. This is supposed to be a zombie apocalypse, But if you just showed someone this episode, starting with the moment Frank showed up, no one would ever think this was a story about a world that had been taken over by zombie mushroom people. But it's the same scenario with everyone we meet in the show. The Kansas City survivors are so unconcerned with the infection that they can focus on killing a guy and his little brother. The old couple in the mountains didn't seem worried, and even the cannibals in Tommy's commune in Wyoming never had to worry about the zombies or the infection even once. Now I get that this story is about the human side of surviving in this world, but I never got the feeling that the zombies were a big deal. So it made me wonder why the world was in the condition it was in. Why is everyone hiding and acting all scary when there's never anything to be afraid of? And that made me question why Ellie was so important. Why do they even need a vaccine or a cure or whatever when the infected are never really an issue to anyone? The zombies don't seem like they're really that hard to kill, so why not just catch one of them and figure out a way to kill them with some sort of bioweapon or a chemical? Or why not take the I Am Legend approach and try to find a cure by testing different things on zombies that you caught? And the bigger issue with this whole vaccine is, how do you create a vaccine for something that's not a virus? The zombies aren't technically infected. They've been taken over by a mutated mushroom that's closer to a conscious living organism than a virus. And even if a cure or a vaccine was possible, why wouldn't the Fireflies try to work with Fedra to create a cure? Now, if you played the games, you know why Fedra is bad, but the show doesn't really give us a reason to dislike them. Sure, they have armed guards in the city and they're trying to maintain some sort of order, but we never see them doing anything bad. And judging by how easily Joel and Tess can leave the city in the middle of the day to have brunch with Bill and Frank, why don't people just leave the city and start their own town if Fedra is so bad? Overall, this wasn't a terrible show, and there were some really great moments that I enjoyed, but it was full of so much damn unnecessary filler that I feel like if you got rid of all the pointless scenes, this would have probably worked better as a movie. Now, this is the definition of filler. Filler episodes are entries in a generally continuous serial that are unrelated to the main plot, don't significantly alter the relations between characters, and generally serve only to take up space. Now, I know you can think of at least 3 episodes that are complete filler, but it's even worse than that because even the good episodes are full of filler too, so what I want to do in this video is re-edit the show and go episode by episode and show you that this 8-hour and 44-minute story could have easily been told in 3 hours and been a way better experience. Like I said, I think this was a pretty decent show, but there's some pacing and editing issues that kind of ruin the experience for me, so even though I don't have a problem with most of the episodes, I'm going to be cutting and moving around some scenes from the good episodes to places where I think they would be more effective. The 1968 TV show is the perfect way to start a story like this, because it's introducing a new type of zombie, so it's important to explain what makes them different from other zombies. It also grounds the story in reality because this type of thing actually does happen to insects, so it's technically possible that it can happen to us. And even though this is a great way to start this type of show, the show never really focuses much on the infection aside from a few pre-credit scenes. There's only a few times where we see anyone get infected, and even then they're just isolated cases and we never get to see the process of them turning. This first scene makes it seem like the infection is going to be an important part of the story, but the show would have been basically the same if we never knew what caused the outbreak in the first place. The infection is a much bigger part of the games, but the show could have been about an alien invasion or some natural disaster, and it would literally be the same. So there's no reason to add intro scenes like this because they're just filler that don't impact the story. And this is what I meant when I said this is a terribly written show. The very first scene is already unnecessary and doesn't add anything to the story. Now, normally it would make sense to introduce characters like this by just showing them living their normal lives and establishing some baseline relationship dynamics, but none of this adds anything to the story. There's some clever little details about them not eating bread, and this is why they didn't turn into zombies, but it really doesn't matter because so many other people survived this situation too, so it's not like this ends up being special. The entire opening scene of them eating breakfast and Sarah going to school and getting Joel's watch fixed could be cut, because even though this is supposed to introduce us to these characters, I think spending 20 minutes on this is a waste of time and it ruins the pacing right away. The first 2 episodes are an almost scene-for-scene copy of the game, except the game starts a lot quicker and it doesn't have so much build-up before the outbreak starts. I like when movies jump right into the action, especially when we already know what's going to happen. Zombie movies usually start by dropping us into the story with little build-up, and because there's so much downtime later on, all the details we get in the beginning will be better if they were saved for later on in flashbacks. With my edit, I would take the same approach as the game and cut from the 1968 interview and fade right into Sarah waking up as the world is falling apart. She would walk around the house calling for her dad, and then she would go to her neighbor's house and see the zombies for the first time. And this is when I would introduce Joel and Tommy. I would do it this way because this is a horror show, so it's more effective to create a level of suspense. So when we first see Joel hop out of the truck with the weapon, there'd be a moment of concern for Sarah. It would be like, who is this guy? Is he someone that's there to help, or is he someone that's going to take advantage of her? For me, this is a much better introduction to the outbreak because everything is so chaotic and we don't have a chance to catch our breath or figure out what's going on right away. The truck scene of them trying to escape the city is perfect, but I would cut as soon as the plane explodes and the truck flips over and save the Sarah dying part for later on in a flashback. When everything goes black, I would cut to 20 years later and introduce you to Joel in present day. Everything with the kids showing up and showing the city and the Fedra soldiers and everything is fine, but I would cut the scene of Joel selling the pills and the introduction of Tess being interrogated. Neither one of these scenes add anything to the story, and any information we might get here is told to us later on anyway. Instead, I would have cut to Ellie's introduction in this spot because, after all, this show is about Joel and Ellie. After that, I would have cut to the scene where Joel is asking about his brother and then showing him looking at the map. This is important because Tommy is a big reason why Joel agrees to take Ellie across country. He doesn't really care about her at this point, so it's good to see that his motivations are more selfish and realistic, and it gives him room to get attached to her as the story goes on. Now this is the part where I would add the first flashback. And I think flashbacks are better for explaining what happened to Sarah because if you hint at it throughout the show, instead of just telling us right away, it makes the impact of her death feel more like it's consistently on Joel's mind. The show already does this with Ellie, but we don't really see what happened to her until episode 6, so doing something similar with Joel would be far better for his character development. Showing Sarah getting his watch fixed in the beginning was kinda pointless because the watch is never important to the story. And it would have been just as effective seeing her give him the watch like it was brand new instead of wasting 5 minutes on it. So here's how the flashback would go.
Did you?
What?
I don't hear anything. Come on. You come on. I know, baby. No, I know. Tommy, help me!
I cut all of the scenes with Joel and Sarah from the beginning of the episode because I think they would have much more impact if they were used as nightmares throughout the season. We never got to see what Joel was like after Sarah died, so we just have to assume that he's still messed up about her dying 20 years ago. And I don't know what it's like to lose a kid, but I just don't think someone would be this messed up after 20 years. It would have been so much better to have an entire episode showing us how he got to this point instead of what they did with episode 3. And this is where I would introduce Tess. We really don't need to know how she got beat up or what really happened to her, and even though her and Joel's relationship is hinted at, it's never really an important part of his character and you never get the impression that he loved her or anything, so there's really no reason to focus on it so much. Plus, it's better to have him stay emotionally numb because of his daughter, so when he eventually starts caring about Ellie, it feels like it's the first person that he's actually cared about since she died. I would leave out the Firefly meeting because it really doesn't matter that much, and I would instead stay focused on Joel and Ellie's story and only keep the part where Ellie is talking before she gets unchained, and then show Joel and Tess sneaking through the city until they meet Ellie. Now after they agree to take Ellie, I would just have them immediately start sneaking out of the city and skip the whole apartment scene with the radio because, as I'm going to get to in a minute, I think the entire Bill and Frank side story was really pointless and it honestly kind of messed up the show. Episode 2 starts with another flashback explaining more about how the mushrooms took over the world. And I like that we get a deeper explanation because the subtleties of Joel not eating bread in the first episode probably went over everybody's head.
But I'm on Atkins.
It's only about 5 minutes, but it honestly could have been cut down to about 2 because most of this is just wasted screen time. This is another character that we never see again, so all of this build up and all the formalities before she does the autopsy are just more filler. Even though it was valuable information, I feel like it could have been probably cut out completely for the same reason the 1968 scene could have. It was very unnecessary because the show never explores the cordyceps or the zombies in any real detail, so the cause of the outbreak doesn't really matter to the overall story. There's also a line in this scene that kind of invalidates Ellie's importance, so the entire motivation for her to be given to Joel later on is kind of pointless. Because if an experienced virologist thinks blowing up a city is better than trying to find a cure, why would anyone think trying to make a vaccine 20 years later, after the world has already gone to shit, is even worth it? Now, I would have faded from Joel, Ellie, and Tess escaping the city to Ellie waking up and telling him that she's immune. Some of them walking through the city and the buildings is okay, but most of it will be cut too because we see the same stuff later on with Ellie and Joel. Now the final 20 minutes with the clicker and Tess dying would definitely stay because it's one of the best parts of the show. I don't really have much to say about this episode. I would just trim it down a little bit and only keep about half of it because most of this is just filler. I'm gonna be honest with you, I absolutely hated episode 3. And no, it's not because of the whole gay romance thing. It was an hour and 15 minutes of pointless side story that basically wasted an entire episode on nothing. It ruined the pacing and validated many of the plot points in the story, and it was the textbook definition of filler. Now before we get into it, answer me this. What was the point of Bill and Frank's characters, and how did they add to the world building or to Joel and Ellie's story? The only valuable thing that happens in this episode was Ellie stealing a gun because it's important to events that happen later on. But other than that, in the 15 minutes that they're in the house, everything else could have been cut. Now let's start with the opening. Joel and Ellie are sleeping in the woods like they do every episode, and they go to an abandoned store so Joel can get some weapons that he stashed there. This doesn't make any sense.
It does not make sense!
Because he just ends up at Bill's house and has access to all of the guns he needs, so what's the point of this scene? Maybe it's so Ellie can go into the basement and find tampons and play around with a zombie, even though we already saw the doctor cut open an infected person in the last episode, so this wasn't really new information. And I really don't understand the point of bringing so much attention to a 14-year-old's menstrual cycle because her period is never important to the story. It's not like in Pitch Black where the young girl was pretending to be a boy until Riddick realized the monsters were tracking them because they could smell her blood. But in this show, why do we need two separate scenes about Ellie's period?
Why, Black Dynamite? Why?
Now I know I'm editing this like a movie and not like a show, but just imagine if episode 2 ended like this. And episode 3 started like this.
Stay there.
What important information did we miss out on?
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
That was an hour of screen time that could have been used for world building or showing Fedra take over, or more scenes of the chaos from the initial outbreak, or even a flashback of Joel's life after Sarah died. The whole point of this flashback was supposed to be about explaining what happened to the skeletons on the side of the road, but Joel already told Ellie what happened, and in the flashback only 2 minutes was devoted to seeing them get evacuated by the military. This entire episode was just a bait and switch to tell this gay-ass romance story, and don't act like everyone would be sucking this episode off if it was a man and a woman because you know they wouldn't. I think the biggest issue I have with this episode is that it makes it feel like this world isn't dangerous. I never got the feeling that the zombies or the raiders or anything were a big deal. And it's hard to argue against that when these two are so comfortable that they can argue about normal stupid relationship things and even have brunch on their front yard. Did they forget that this world is supposed to be overrun by zombies? They're planting strawberries and jogging around the neighborhood, and there's never a point where I feel like they're in danger. Oh, and if Joel and Tess can casually leave the QZ in the middle of the day to come here and have brunch, why did they need to sneak out in the middle of the night like Shawshank Redemption when they had Ellie? And why are they so stressed out about a car battery when they could have just asked Bill for one? So you see how this episode kind of ruins the immersion and pacing, and it invalidates several plot points from the first 2 episodes? The reason there's a QZ with Fedra soldiers everywhere is because the zombies are supposed to be dangerous. But Bill obviously didn't get the memo. The reason Joel and Tess agreed to take Ellie is so they can get a car battery, but they already knew a guy that could have given them one. And the reason the world is destroyed is because no one can handle the zombies, but a gay Home Alone guy all grown up can secure an entire town by himself. I think this was a terrible idea to cut away from Joel and Ellie in the first episode that they were alone together, so for my edit, I'm cutting from Tess blowing herself up to Joel and Ellie showing up at Bill and Frank's house after they're dead. This is another episode that's full of filler that takes away from the main story. Now it's only about 45 minutes long, but we only really need to keep about half of it because there are some good parts in it. The opening scene of Ellie playing with the gun should be cut because it's better to forget that she has it until she has to use it to save Joel. I would open with Joel getting gas and Ellie reading the pun book, and I would cut them sleeping in the woods and have it go from them getting gas to them driving. Now the reason I don't think the sleeping scenes are worth keeping is because nothing of value happens. The jokes and conversations they have could have been had when they were driving or basically any other time they're together. And once again, the lack of zombies or anything dangerous in these scenes is a constant reminder of how little danger there is in this world. We don't even have zombies in our world, and I would be afraid to just sleep out in the open like this. But they could just drive across the country and pull over on the side of the road anywhere they want and just lay down out in the open and nothing ever happens. Joel and Ellie go to multiple big cities, drive down freeways, they go to stores and gas stations, and everywhere they go, there's never any zombies. I don't know why people don't just go back to living their normal lives, because apparently there's nothing to be afraid of. Now, we hear about zombies and raiders and bad people, but the most dangerous people we see are a group of starving people in a cult. And Joel's able to kill all the dangerous guys in their group by himself in 20 minutes. Now, I get that this is supposed to be some emotional story about love and loss, but come the fuck on. We got a gay couple living so comfortably that they get to die practically of old age. I mean, they die of old age in a zombie apocalypse. There's a cute old bickering couple living in a cabin, and they seem pretty happy about their situation. There's a group of religious people that only have to worry about food, and a fully functioning peaceful city that has zero problems. And even the Kansas City group is more worried about killing a guy and his little brother than the zombies that are about to bust through the floor like the Kool-Aid Man. Yeah, and I get that she's supposed to be blinded by revenge, but you would be more concerned if you saw a spider in your house than she is about a literal zombie fucking volcano about to bust through the ground in the middle of the city. And it's things like that that kind of ruin the entire premise for me. This is supposed to be a post-apocalyptic world, and somehow this soft-ass 8th grade teacher is in charge of everything.
How, Sway?
I mean, she's not intimidating or charismatic, and she doesn't even make good decisions, so why is everyone following her? And why doesn't anyone in this world seem like they're ever worried about the zombies? I would have went from leaving Bill and Frank's to the scene with the porn magazine, and then have them driving until they reach Kansas City. The decision to drive directly through a major city is also kind of stupid because they could have easily just went around it and stayed on the freeway, so there was really no reason to even risk it. Why risk running into zombies or raiders, or even worse, what would Joel have done if Fedra was still in charge? Remember when the soldiers scanned Ellie and she came up positive when they tried to escape the first QZ? Why wouldn't Fedra do the same thing if they caught 2 random people driving through their city? The choice to drive through Kansas City was stupid, and it was only there to create an unnecessary obstacle because the writers don't know how to create organic conflict. Anyway, I would have kept the whole encounter with the car crashing and Ellie shooting the guy, but the part I would have cut was most of the side plot with them looking for Henry. After Joel killed the guy, I would have went from the scene of him giving Ellie the gun back to the part where the rebels are looking at the guys that they killed, and then back to Joel and Ellie climbing up the stairs looking for a place to sleep. Basically, the end of this episode is all good, but the only real changes I would have made was removing most of the scenes with Kathleen. This is another filler episode just like number 3, and if it wasn't for the last 20 minutes, this entire episode would be pointless. The Henry and Sam backstory was completely unnecessary, and it really didn't even show us what happened. We get to see the most boring ass parts of them creeping around in the shadows and hiding in the attic like Anne Frank, instead of seeing the part where Fedra was still in charge and seeing the resistance take over after Kathleen's brother got killed. This is the laziest fucking way to tell a backstory because Henry just tells Joel what happened anyway, so what's the point of having this whole episode where we don't even get to see it? And I know Henry and Sam are in the games, but wouldn't it have made more sense to just have Joel and Ellie kill Kathleen's brother instead of this Randy, and then show her losing her shit and wanting to kill them? That way it would feel more natural that this lady would be in charge because she would be so passionate about avenging her brother, and everyone would only be listening to her because they want to kill the people that killed their leader. I can't completely cut Henry and Sam out of the story, but I would have only kept the most necessary parts. I would start with Sam waking them up, then showing them getting to know each other as they come up with a plan to escape the city, and then I would cut to a few scenes from the last episode where Kathleen and Perry are looking for him. Then I would cut back to them going through the tunnel. The tunnel scene was a big missed opportunity, and once again there wasn't a single zombie or obstacle, even though this was a perfect spot to add some tension. This could have been a great opportunity to use the fact that Sam is deaf and the clickers hunt by sound, and maybe have him get bitten here instead of this goofy ass under the car scene. These things supposedly took over the entire world, but they can't grab a little kid that's hiding under a car. If so much money wasn't wasted on stupid shit like episode 3 or the dumbass backstory in this episode, this could have been a very tense scene with a clicker or two. It's absolutely ridiculous that they didn't use the fact that Sam is deaf as part of the story, especially when you have creatures that hunt by sound and you can have Sam making noise and not know it and create a really tense scene. And I'm really kind of tired of using the word woke, but the fact that Sam being deaf is never used in the story just brings more attention to the fact that he was only in the story to check a diversity box. Hey look, we got a deaf kid and a gay couple, and the leader of the Fireflies is a black woman, and Joel's daughter is half black, and Tommy's wife is black, and oh yeah, she's the leader of this town, and a woman is a leader of the resistance too, and it's like every man in this story is either a bad guy or some submissive sidekick to a female character.
He ain't lying.
I really didn't care so much when I was first watching it, but when I really start critiquing it to make this video, stuff like the tampons or the fact that women are in charge of everything really stood out. Anyway, the scene in the basement was more pointless filler because we really didn't learn anything new about Joel or Ellie, and Henry and Sam die in the next 10 minutes anyway, so who really gives a shit about their character development? I would have had them cut through the tunnel, and instead of them stopping, just had them keep going until they came out at night and start walking down the street. I would keep the entire ending part because it's the only time the zombies feel dangerous, and the end part where Henry has to kill Sam is a really great emotional scene too. I'm cutting the first 10 minutes of this episode because these characters don't mean anything to the overall story, and they tell Joel something that he could have found out on his own. Maybe the filmmakers forgot that the best way to give the audience information is to show and not tell, but considering that their information was bullshit anyway, this entire opening scene was just 10 minutes of more pointless filler. They tell him that crossing the river is supposed to be super dangerous.
You never go past the river here.
What's past the river?
Death. We never seen who's out there, but we see the bodies they leave behind.
But when they cross it, they don't see anything like they described. There's no zombies, no raiders, no dead bodies, and we don't even see any wild animals. The only thing they find is a very reasonable group of people that only want to make sure that they're not infected. So what was the point of this opening scene? I would have completely cut this opening scene and instead went from Joel and Ellie leaving the hotel after they buried Sam and Henry, then soft fade to the 3 months later title and show them walking through the snow, and then show them talking next to the fire at night. And this is where I would put another flashback. Oh, and I forgot to mention before that I would have put another flashback nightmare in when Joel was sleeping in Kansas City right before they met Sam and Henry. The first one in episode 1 was just a few happy moments with Sarah, and the Kansas City one would have been Joel carrying her after they crashed, and the one I'm going to show you right now would finally reveal what happened to her. Now I'm not going to show you the entire way I would edit it because the scene is too long, so I'm just going to give you a truncated version of it so you get the idea.
Sheep ranches on the moon.
Oh, well.
Sir, we are not sick! No. Okay.
Still mumbling in your sleep.
The reason I waited so long to explore what happened to Sarah is to make it feel like it's been something that's been haunting him, and also to use it as a representation of him finally accepting her death because now he's starting to care about Ellie. I would then have them cross the river, have the dog smelling scene, then Joel would meet his brother, but instead of having the eating scene, I would cut to them having a drink, then the panic attack, and then Ellie having her haircut. I would cut all the walking around the town scenes because none of this matters anyway, and it's just more filler space that could have been used for other things. The scenes with Joel opening up to his brother and with Ellie admitting that she's scared are two of the best scenes in the entire show. It's really rewarding to see both of them be so vulnerable, and this is the moment the entire show's been building up to, and it's the moment when they develop a true connection and they both grow as characters. I would cut most of the bonding scenes after they leave because the previous scenes already showed us that they care about each other. Plus, there's been little hints throughout the show that show them bonding, so there's really no need to have this complete 180 on both of their personalities. Now this is the complicated part because I would do some major rearranging of the events in the last 3 episodes, so instead of having the Colorado facility be abandoned, I would take the city scenes from episode 9 where the Fireflies attack them and put it right here. I mentioned in the beginning that I didn't really like the Fireflies being the final boss because they're supposed to be the good guys at first, and after Joel kills them, it doesn't really force Joel or Ellie to grow or change in any meaningful way. I would instead make David the final boss of the show because he actually does force them to struggle and they're noticeably changed after they survive the encounter. After Joel kills the Fireflies, I would cut the scene of them getting into the car, and instead I would use the scene from the end of episode 6 where Joel gets stabbed and falls off the horse. Then I would soft fade from Ellie crying to the trail of blood in the snow, and then show them inside of the house right before Ellie goes outside to hunt. This is the Ellie backstory episode, but I would have saved this for later on because I think it would be more impactful and be better for pacing in a different location. I would cut the scenes of the resort with David's group and instead show Ellie hunting the deer, meeting David and James, and then going back with the medicine for Joel. It's pretty easy to cut the intro to their group because it would be better to introduce his character with more mystery. By giving him a cold introduction, it makes his friendly personality seem genuine instead of showing that he's a scumbag right away. It's also better to wait to show the cannibal stuff because it works better after they catch Ellie. At first you would think that he's actually gonna let her go, but then when she sees the ear, we would immediately think that he's really gonna eat her. After Ellie goes back to give Joel the medicine, I would show David going back to the group, then I would have him and his goon show up, catch Ellie, and have Joel kill all of his guys. I actually like the Ellie backstory episode, and the only reason I'm cutting any of it is because I think the same information can be conveyed in less time. So for the most part, I would keep all the main scenes, but the alcohol part would be cut, the video game part would be cut, and just some of them looking around would be cut too. The important parts will be the carousel, the photo booth, the Halloween store where they get attacked, and I really don't want to cut any of this because it's actually a solid episode from start to finish, but I would only keep about half of the 55-minute runtime. Because an entire episode was devoted to Ellie's backstory, I don't think the opening scene of episode 9 with her mom is necessary. It really doesn't matter why Ellie is immune, and in fact, it kind of invalidates the point of the entire story. Very little time is spent on the science fiction parts of the story because all the attention is put on the human aspects of surviving. There's hardly any zombies, and getting infected never seems like a really big issue to anyone. There's never a scene where Joel might get bitten or anything like that, so even though the whole reason Joel is taking Ellie across country is to bring her to the Fireflies, all that's kind of thrown out of the window after they have their emotional exchange in episode 5. The whole reason he killed the Fireflies was because he wanted to protect Ellie, so trying to put more emphasis on her immunity in the last episode is really kind of pointless. One of the biggest flaws with this show is trying to explain too many tiny details about insignificant things, and that really ruins the pacing. This show suffers from the issue of not trusting the audience enough to put the pieces together without holding their hands with everything. Anyway, I would end the story with Ellie killing David and Joel showing up outside, and then soft fade from them walking away to her face at the beginning of episode 9. She's been so bubbly and fun the entire series, and this is a great way to show that her experiences have changed her. And having her and Joel basically switch personalities is also a great way to end the story too. I would have Ellie looking broken and defeated while Joel is hopeful and trying to be a dad, and then cut to them walking and talking in the city and then through the woods, and then have her asking about what happened with the Fireflies. The pacing and character development works so much better this way because Ellie's devastated after killing David, and then she's happy again after the giraffe scene, and then she goes back to being devastated again after the Firefly scene, but I think it would be better to never show her going back and forth and just leave her in an emotionally numb state. It's the same thing with Joel. He's happy when he decides to take Ellie instead of letting his brother do it, then he has to go John Wick to kill all of David's guys, and then he's happy and fatherly after that, and then he goes back to being a killer with the Fireflies, and then he's happy again in the end. I think it's better to have him kill the Fireflies first, and then when he wakes up from his injury, he's still in killer mode with David's goons, and then he's happy after he finds Ellie, and he stays happy until the end. So what do you think? The way I edited this could still work without cutting so much. The main things were rearranging the events from the last 4 episodes so it flowed better, and putting some of the flashbacks of Sarah throughout the show instead of all at once in the beginning. I managed to cut away more than half of the show with relative ease, and I still think this would work much better as a movie because even if you didn't like all the cuts I made, you still have to admit that there were at least 3 to 4 episodes worth of filler.